The noon sun in the border town didn't just shine, it punished. It baked the hard-packed dirt until it cracked, filled the air with grit, and turned every breath into a swallow of heat and dust. From the saddle, the rancher could see the street ahead shimmering like a mirage. He wasn't here for trouble, just salt, rope, maybe a sack of beans. But trouble had a way of finding a man who'd sworn to avoid it. That's when he saw her. At first, she was just a shape in the haze, a figure crouched low, chained to a weathered post in the center of the square. As he rode closer, the picture sharpened. She was young, Apache, her skin blistered under the sun, hair matted and heavy with dust. A rusty chain looped around her wrists and ankles, biting into raw skin. She didn't look up when the crowd jeered, when a boy threw a pebble that struck her cheek. The townsfolk circled like buzzards, spitting insults and cheap whiskey. One man laughed. "She's auction stock. By sundown, she'll belong to the highest bidder." Another added, "Or the meanest." The rancher's reins tightened in his grip. He could have kept riding. Should have. This wasn't his fight, and a man with sense knew not to buy himself an enemy. But sense had a way of dying when he looked at her, at the way she sat, not pleading, not crying, just staring at the ground like the sun itself couldn't burn through her pride. He swung down from his horse, boots sinking into the hot dust. The smell of rust, sweat, and cruelty hit him in one breath. Somewhere deep in his chest, a memory stirred. His father standing in front of an Apache family, rifle raised, telling a drunken posse they'd have to shoot through him first. His father had paid with his life. And here he was, staring at a choice that felt too much like fate circling back. The rancher didn't speak at first. He just stood there, staring at the chain, the post, and the boots of the men who'd put her there. His shadow fell across the Apache girl's bare feet, a thin strip of mercy from the punishing sun. Only then did she lift her head. Her eyes were a shade caught between coal and storm clouds, dark, unflinching, and far too old for her young face. There was no plea in them, no hope either. Just the quiet weight of someone who'd already learned that nobody was coming. "Move along, cowboy," a voice barked from the left. The rancher turned. The man was broad-shouldered, badge pinned crooked on his vest, his smirk carved deep enough to leave scars. "This one's under custody," the sheriff's deputy said. "Town ordinance says all native prisoners go to auction. She'll bring a good price tonight." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, men leaning on fence rails, women fanning themselves, all of them sipping at the theater of it. "What's the charge?" the rancher asked. The deputy shrugged. "Being here, breathing air that ain't hers." The rancher's jaw flexed. He'd heard this tone before, in saloons where men bragged about shooting buffalo from train windows, in back rooms where land deeds were traded for bullets. It was the tone of a man who believed the law was whatever came out of his own mouth. He looked back at the girl. The iron cuffs had rubbed the skin on her wrists down to raw, bloody rings. Flies landed and lifted with each tremor of her breathing. Yet she sat straight, spine unbent, as if the chain were nothing but a rope of twine. The rancher stepped closer. "I'll take her off your hands." The crowd went still, the way men do when they smell the first strike of a fight. The deputy's grin widened. "That so? What would a rancher want with an Apache stray?" "She's not your stray," the rancher said, voice low. "And she's not yours to sell." A laugh broke out. One man, then two, until it rolled over the square. The deputy spat into the dust. "Everything in this town is for sale, cowboy." Even her pride. The rancher reached into his coat. Coins clinked in his palm, every dollar he'd brought for supplies. He held them out. "This will cover it." The deputy looked at the money, then at the girl, then back at the rancher. "You must think you're buying a milk cow. Let me save you the trouble, she's not worth it. But if you want to waste your money, I'll take it." A ripple of unease moved through the onlookers. Even those used to cruelty seemed to sense the line being crossed. The deputy pocketed the coins and stepped aside. "Go on, cowboy. She's yours." The rancher knelt. His fingers brushed the lock, cold and rust-bitten. With a twist of his knife, the cuff sprang loose. The chain fell into the dust with a dull, final clink. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slow as a shadow, she stood. Her legs trembled, but her chin lifted, eyes fixed on the deputy. The sun caught the steel in them. The rancher thought it was over. He thought they could walk away. He was wrong. A hand clamped down on his shoulder. The smell of cheap whiskey hit him before the words did. "You just robbed tonight's entertainment, friend," slurred a tall man in a bowler hat. Behind him, 5 more men stepped forward, guns loose at their sides. "She's not your business," the rancher said. "She's our property," another snapped. "You think you can just buy her in the street and ride away? She belongs to the auction house." The rancher shifted his stance, his body now between the girl and the men. "Not anymore." The first man grinned. "Then we'll take her back, and maybe take your horse too." The crowd scattered. The deputy stayed put, arms folded, smirk in place. He wasn't going to lift a finger. The rancher's pulse slowed the way it always did before violence. His hand hovered near his Colt. "You'll have to go through me." The bowler hat man's smile faded. A twitch, a move toward his gun. The girl's voice cut through the heat, low and steady. "Don't." For the first time, the rancher realized she wasn't afraid for herself. She was warning him, and in that moment, he knew. Whatever fight was coming, it wouldn't end in the square. By sundown, blood would run in the dust. If you felt the heat, the tension, and the danger closing in, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and share this story. Every click helps keep these Wild West tales alive, so the voices history tried to silence can still be heard today. The standoff in the square broke like a sudden storm. The bowler hat man's hand twitched toward his gun, and the rancher moved faster. Steel flashed. The Colt cleared leather. The sound of the hammer cocking cracked through the heat. For a long second, no one breathed. The Apache girl didn't move, didn't flinch. "You shoot me here, cowboy," the man sneered, "and you won't make it to sundown." "Maybe not," the rancher said, "but you won't make it to dinner." The threat hung in the air like the weight of the sun itself. Behind them, a door slammed, and somewhere a horse snorted. The crowd had already peeled back to the shade, wanting no part of the blood they knew was about to spill. The deputy's voice came slow and lazy. "Let him walk, boys. Plenty of hours till dark. Plenty of ways to make him wish he'd never stopped here." That was worse than an order to shoot. It meant they'd come later, when they could choose the place, the numbers, the angle. The rancher didn't holster his gun. He backed away one step at a time, the girl behind him, her bare feet kicking up little bursts of dust. Only when they reached his horse did he sheath the Colt and swing into the saddle. He leaned down, offering her a hand. She hesitated. Her eyes flicked once toward the men in the square, then to the open desert beyond. Finally, she took his arm, light as smoke, and he pulled her up behind him. They didn't gallop. Galloping would have been a confession, panic on display. Instead, the rancher set the horse to a steady lope, each hoofbeat carrying them further from the square, the stairs, the stench of cruelty baked into the boards of that town. For a time, there was only the sound of wind in their ears. Then she spoke. "You shouldn't have done that." His eyes stayed on the horizon. "Probably not. They'll come for you. They'll come for us." She didn't argue. By the time they reached the low ridge west of town, the sun had slipped lower, stretching shadows long across the sand. The rancher pulled up near an abandoned way station. 3 crumbling walls, a collapsed roof, and just enough cover to catch their breath. He dismounted first, scanning the land behind them. Empty, for now. She slid down without help, moving stiffly on raw, swollen ankles. "Sit," he said, jerking his chin toward the shade of the wall. She did, but her eyes never stopped tracking the desert, the distant shapes of vultures circling high. He pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and offered it. She took one small sip, then another, before passing it back. Her hands were steady now, but he could see the tremor in her shoulders. "What's your name?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, "Tiva." It suited her, short, sharp, the sound of a word you couldn't quite catch in the wind. "You have a place you can go, Tiva?" She gave a bitter half-smile. "You just took me from the place they planned to send me. There is no other place." The truth of it landed heavy between them. She was rootless now. Not because she'd chosen to be, but because the world had chosen it for her. The rancher glanced east. Heat shimmered on the horizon, but in its wavering blur, he thought he saw dust rising. Small at first, then swelling. Riders. He didn't say it out loud. Instead, he moved quick, tightened the cinch on his saddle, stuffed the canteen back into the bag, scanned for the fastest path down the ridge. Tiva rose without needing to be told. She might have been chained that morning, but there was nothing hesitant in the way she moved now. They mounted up again. This time, there was no slow lope, no measured retreat. The rancher dug his heels into the horse's flank, and they bolted, weaving through dry washes and thorned mesquite, dust boiling behind them. From the ridge came the distant crack of a rifle. The bullet hissed past, close enough to hear. Another followed, chipping stone. Tiva gripped his coat, leaning low against his back. The rancher felt her heartbeat through the fabric. Not fast, not wild, but steady, like she'd been here before, outrunning death across an open land that refused to hide anyone. By the time they reached the riverbed, the light had turned gold. The water was low, just a trickle between banks of mud, but it offered a way to cover their tracks. He urged the horse in, feeling the cold seep up through the hooves. They followed the water south, far enough that the sound of pursuit faded into the wind. Only then did he slow, listening hard. Nothing. He looked back at Tiva. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn, her skin marked by sun and steel. But her eyes, those coal and storm eyes, met his without fear. Whatever came next, it would come for both of them now, and neither would face it alone. The sun was bleeding into the horizon by the time they left the riverbed. That gold light from earlier had shifted to a deep bruised orange, the kind that promised more than nightfall. It promised reckoning. The rancher kept the horse angled along the ridgeline, scanning for a place to hole up until morning. They needed higher ground, but they also needed distance, and he knew in his bones that their pursuers hadn't given up. Men like that didn't let go. Not when their pride was on the line. Not when they thought a woman was theirs. Tiva hadn't spoken since they'd left the water. She sat straight behind him, hands resting lightly on his belt, head turning now and then to watch their back trail. Every so often, her grip tightened, just slightly, as if she felt something in the air he couldn't yet see. By the time the first shot cracked, he wasn't surprised. It came from the ridge above, sharp, echoing, close enough to feel the hot breath of the bullet as it passed his ear. The horse lurched, hooves scrambling on loose rock. The rancher leaned forward, forcing it down the slope toward a stand of juniper. Voices followed, men shouting to one another, their words snatched and scattered by the wind. He caught fragments. Cut him off! Don't let her run! Bring her back alive. Tiva's voice was steady, low. 2 on the ridge, 3 more ahead. They're trying to push us into the open. He didn't ask how she knew. He just trusted it. Instead of veering toward the open basin, he swung hard right, guiding the horse along a narrow goat trail that clung to the side of the hill. Loose gravel rattled under the hooves, tumbling down into the dry gulch below. Another shot. This one struck stone near Tiva's knee, spraying her with grit. She didn't flinch. At the crest, the trail widened into a small saddle between 2 rises. That's where they hit. 3 riders came out of the shadows ahead, rifles already shouldered. Behind them, dust rose from the gulch. 2 more men pushing up fast. The rancher counted them in an instant. 5 in total. 6, if the deputy had decided to get his own hands dirty. Slide off, he told Tiva. She obeyed without question, dropping to the ground and moving toward the cover of a boulder. The rancher swung down after her, pulling the Winchester from its scabbard. The first rider didn't wait. He spurred forward, firing from the saddle. The rancher dropped to one knee, returning fire. The man pitched sideways, tumbling into the dust. The other 2 split wide, trying to flank. Tiva's voice came again, urgent. Right side. He pivoted, caught the glint of a rifle barrel, and fired. The second man jerked back, his shot going high into the sky. The third reached cover, dismounting behind a fallen tree. From the gulch below, the last 2 riders emerged, their horses lathered and wild-eyed. The air turned thick with gun smoke and the dry, metallic scent of blood. The rancher felt the world narrowing, just the rifle in his hands, the shapes moving through shadow, the pounding in his ears. A shout, a rush of footsteps. One of the men had broken from cover, trying to get around the boulder where Tiva crouched. She was ready. The flash of her knife caught the dying sun. One slash, low, fast, and the man collapsed, clutching his thigh. She didn't wait to see if he'd rise. She was already moving, scooping up the dropped revolver and firing into the dust where another shape shifted. The rancher took the last man head-on. They met in the open, 2 steps apart, no cover left. The other man's rifle misfired, the click loud in the dead air. The rancher's didn't. When the final shot faded, there was only wind again. The bodies lay scattered in the saddle, rifles half buried in the dust, the blood already drying black in the cooling air. The horses, freed from their riders, wandered nervously along the ridge. The rancher lowered his rifle, breathing hard. He turned toward Tiva. She was standing now, the revolver loose in her grip, her hair a dark banner in the wind. For the first time since he'd seen her in the square, there was something in her eyes beyond defiance. Something that looked almost like relief, though it was gone as quickly as it came. He walked toward her. She didn't move, didn't speak, but when he took the revolver from her hand, she let him. Below them, the sky over the town was the color of rust. Somewhere out there, others would hear about what happened here tonight. And they'd come. The rancher knew it. Tiva knew it. But for now, the only sound was the wind scraping through the juniper and the slow, uneven breathing of 2 people who'd lived through something they weren't supposed to survive. The wind carried the scent of blood and gunpowder down into the gulch. The light was fading fast now, the sky above the ridge melting from rust to indigo. The rancher stood still for a long moment, the Winchester hanging loose in his grip. His eyes swept the saddle. 5 men down, their guns scattered, the horses wandering without direction. The quiet was heavy, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that knew the world would start breathing again in a different way, a way you might not survive for long. He turned toward Tiva. She was still standing where he'd left her, the revolver gone from her hand, but the weight of what just happened still in her shoulders. A smear of dust streaked her cheek, and a drop of blood, not her own, clung to the corner of her sleeve. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "You?" she countered. He flexed his left arm where the recoil had jarred muscle. Nothing worth slowing down for. There was no victory in either of their voices, just the acknowledgement that they'd bought themselves another hour of breathing. The rancher moved first. He stepped over the fallen, stripped ammunition from belts and checked each rifle. He tossed 2 into the gulch. They weren't leaving weapons for the next group to pick up. Tiva joined him, silent, helping gather canteens and a saddlebag from one of the riderless horses. When they were done, the ridge looked less like a battlefield and more like a place the wind would erase before morning. They mounted up without a word. The rancher didn't head back toward the riverbed or the trail west. Instead, he aimed the horse north, toward the black silhouette of the mesas. Tiva didn't ask where they were going, but he caught her glancing at him, as if measuring whether this was just another road that would end in a chain. "They'll keep coming," she said finally. "Then we keep moving." "And when they find us?" He kept his eyes on the dark line of the horizon. "Then we decide if we stop running." The desert opened ahead, wide and endless. The horses' hooves made a hollow rhythm on the hardpan, the kind of sound that could carry for miles in the still air. Night came fast in these lands. The first stars blinked awake overhead and the wind turned cold enough to bite. By the time they reached the base of the first mesa, they'd left the ridge far behind. The rancher swung down, scanning for a place to camp. Tiva dismounted, slower, her movements stiff from the day's ride. They found a shallow overhang, enough to break the wind. The rancher built a small fire, low, tight, just enough to give heat without sending a beacon into the dark. He passed her one of the canteens they'd taken. She drank, then stared into the flames like she was looking for something she'd lost a long time ago. "You could have left me there," she said suddenly. "Could have," he agreed, "but you didn't." He met her gaze across the fire. "I've seen what happens when men stand by and do nothing. My father stood in front of a family once, paid for it with his life. I didn't plan on being him. Guess I didn't have much choice. She didn't reply, but her eyes softened, just for a moment, before she looked back into the fire. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The rancher listened, his hand resting on the rifle beside him. Tomorrow the chase would start again. He knew it. She knew it. And yet, in the fragile stillness between tonight and the coming storm, they had carved out something the men back in that town could never touch. Choice. He leaned back against the stone, eyes half closed. Get some sleep. We'll ride before dawn. Tiva pulled her blanket tight, the firelight dancing over her face. You really think we can make it? We're still breathing, he said. That's enough to start with. Above them, the stars stretched from one horizon to the other, sharp and cold against the velvet dark. The fire burned low, and the night wrapped around them, not as an enemy this time, but as a witness. For now, they were alive, and in the Wild West, that was a victory all its own. If this moment gripped you, if you felt the dust in your lungs, the heat of the gunfire, and the weight of two lives bound together by choice instead of chains, then hit like, subscribe, and share. Every click keeps these Wild West tales riding strong and keeps the voices of those who refuse to bow alive for the next sunrise. The fire had burned down to embers, glowing faint and stubborn in the cold night air. The rancher sat with his back against the rock wall, hat pulled low, rifle within arm's reach. Across the fire, Tiva lay wrapped in the blanket, her breathing slow and steady now, the lines of defiance on her face eased by exhaustion. Somewhere out in the darkness, the men who wanted her were still riding, still scheming. He knew this wasn't over. In the West, nothing ever was. The desert had a way of dragging grudges across miles and years until they found you again. But tonight, she wasn't chained. Tonight, they'd made it through the kind of fight that should have ended both of them. And that mattered. He looked up at the stars. Cold, endless, older than the towns and the laws that tried to break people like her. Somewhere in that sky was the promise of another dawn, another chance to keep riding, to keep choosing. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest scent of juniper. He let out a slow breath, his voice low enough that only the night could hear. We're still breathing. That's enough, for now.